Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on where you are.
Good evening.
Good evening. Just wanted to know if you can see my screen, if you can thumbs up if you can see my screen. Yeah, okay, brilliant. So let's get started for today. In the usual fashion, we'll start with 45 minutes of going through the content, and then we'll spend about 15 minutes or so on questions, and then we'll look at what we have for the rest of the day. So today we are looking at day 3, and this is when we start the gathering of requirements. And for those who have knowledge of implementing ERP in the past, then this is a slightly different way of gathering the requirements. So we're looking at this more from what the business needs to do. And we have a series of guided questions, which are questionnaires that we'll look at for each of the different modules. And then we'll go into the core of the scope. So we'll need to confirm the scope. So we actually are starting up with the scope. Now, what I usually say is that before you start any project, you need to lock down the scope. And if there's any changes, then it has to be a change request. So working within the scope is very, very important, especially when working within ERP type projects. So the first thing we do is I will confirm the scope, and then we'll go on to looking at the details of the questionnaire. We'll spend a bit of time looking at the questionnaire and also looking at the project scenarios. Now, when we look at project scenarios, we're basically looking at what you will actually do when you perform what is called a discovery workshop. So at each stage, you're conducting a workshop with the business, you're taking them through the questionnaire. You're also going to be taking them through some of the key elements of data that you need to collect to build your first level of what I would normally call an MVP, which is the minimum viable product. So we're identifying scope, we're looking at the definition, we're looking at also the review of the questionnaire. So when we talk about the MVP, we're looking at minimum viable product, which is a working solution. It may not be perfect in the first iteration, but the details of what you're collecting right now from the discovery workshop is to have enough information that will enable you to build the first iteration of the product. Now, and what does this actually mean from a requirements gathering perspective? So first, it means that we'll have a configuration questionnaire, which is Excel. This may be in form of like a survey. So you can build this into a survey where people can go in and then ask specific question. And this is where you confirm your scope. And then you collect core data. We're going to be looking at some of the core data that we'll need to collect for this type of workshops. And also we start to then look at how this fits into the project plan. So normally the program office will start to put together a project plan that would determine the resources required, the time that it would take, and then the budget, if they have enough money to be able to complete this task. Now, the enterprise structure is very, very key at this stage. So one of the key things you want to get out of this configuration questionnaire or discovery workshop is the confirmation of the enterprise structure. Now, the enterprise structure shouldn't change that much during the project. It's very rare that you'll get the enterprise structure changing. And if that's the case, then you need to be aware of what changes are coming into the business very early on before you continue your build. So with the scope definition for our project, we're going to be looking at part of the course case study, but the core of our case study will be based along this line. So we're going to be looking at an enterprise which has operation in 3 countries and has a headquarters in the US, research and development in the States, so in the US as well, India manufacturing, US services, UK services, wholesale and retail. So this is basically the flow. But for the first part, we're focusing mainly on the headquarters setup, part of the services setup in the UK, and possibly the manufacturing in India. But in terms of what we're covering on this course, we'll be looking at the headquarters part of that setup. Now, in order for us to do that, we need to have a look at the configuration setup. What exactly do we need to configure within the scope of what we are given to be able to do that? So within the configuration setup, there are a number of areas that we'll start to look at within for the discovery workshop. And those will include, first of all, the enterprise setup, as I mentioned. So, and that will include the enterprise structure. So with the enterprise structure for our setup, we're going to have one enterprise structure, and it'll be for an enterprise operating in 3 countries. So right now, what I'm doing is I'm actually giving you the scope. So one enterprise located in 3 countries, and then you have a legal entity. So you will have 3 legal entities, and you'll have 1 for each of the operating country. And then you have a business unit. Again, you will have 3 business units. Again, 1 for each operating segment. And then we have 3 ledgers, 1 per operating country stroke currency. We're going to talk a little bit more about the ledger and what actually makes up the ledger. We talked about, we mentioned it briefly yesterday in terms of the chart of accounts, the calendar, and so on. So we're going to be looking at the chart of account structure. We're going to have 1 chart of account structure, and we'll have 7 predefined segments, including 2 flexible segments. We'll have the accounting method. Currency, main currency will be US dollars, and the accounting calendar will be from January to December. So again, these are the kind of things that you would normally collect during your discovery workshop. So chart of account structure, we're going to go into this in a bit more detail during the structure and in terms of what you're going to collect from the business. And then you have additional configuration that you start to think about is the inputs for the bank account. So what's the format? Looking at the supported formats and so on. And then also the bank details, because this will include all the standard rules and mapping. So a lot of these elements will be in our configuration setups. The other part will be your integrations. Of course, you have all the modules as well. So, but we're looking at the core structure to start with. And then we look at the integrations. What are we integrating? The inbound integration.
How many ledgers would we have in this scenario?
I did mention that we have 3, but let's keep the questions to the end, because some of these things I will actually mention them, but keep. So if you keep your questions, if I haven't answered your question, then please ask when we get to the 15-minute segment. Yeah. Thank you. So with the integrations, we have 2 levels of integrations. We're looking at the inbound. So with the inbound integration, we're looking at the bank statements. So again, we're looking at this more from a scope. Some of the things that I've mentioned, I'll mention them again in case you've missed them. And also we'll have the details in the other video as well, the detailed video as well. But key things is that we have an integration. So bank statements for the inbound really are data coming in externally into the ERP. We have invoices from customers and also from suppliers. And then the outbound integration that we'll be looking at are the electronic payments. These are the payment files for our suppliers. and electronic invoices that are sent out to customers and any additional reports. So again, looking at the core requirements that we'll be asking. Now, the other thing is the data load. So there are specific data that we would need to load. And one of the core data, there are some core elements, core areas of data. So we'll be looking at the chart of accounts for our ledger. So we have one core ledger. Well, we have 3 ledgers that will build, one per country, but then we'll have one core ledger that we'll be working with when we start to build. So we have chart of accounts. We'll be looking at the structure, building up of our segments with the corresponding values to choose from, and data and how to load the data into those various segments. Again, we'll be looking at the chart of accounts hierarchies, which is the structure. Again, I'm going to talk about that structure a bit later, but again, let's focus mainly on the data elements that we'll be loading. Journals, again, it may be that journals will be required to define the opening balances. So again, there'll be journals for that. And then you've got active suppliers that are on the system. Now, you could, at this point, start to ask questions like, how many active suppliers do you usually have? So to give you a sense of the methods of loading, which we'll talk about later in the course. And then you have open AP invoices, you have active customers, we have open AR invoices, and also any receipts that are transmitted via lockbox. So again, these are the kind of things that we look at for the core data load. Core processes, again, within the scope. So again, one thing I need to mention within the data load is that the moment you understand the volume of data, start to lock this down within some kind of scope. So you don't want the business to tell you that, oh, we're going to be loading just 5 invoices. And you say, okay, well, let's do that manually. And then when you get towards the go live, you discover that you have 7,000 open invoices. And then that's practically, then you have to make a change to the way you do certain things. So at the very early onset, start to get ideas of the volumes of data that you are going to load. So core processes that we'll be looking at, let's start with payables. Payables, we receive and process invoice. So you're taking the business through the core payables processes. Again, we're going to go into this in a bit more detail, but as part of your discovery workshop, you'll be going through the main processes. So we receive and we process invoices, the audit of the invoices by looking at things like whether there are withholding tax, whether there holds need to be placed on them, whether they need to be approved. So again, application of prepayment, the approval method, how the approval will work, accounting for the invoices, recording payments, and also processing the payment files, and how to record the accounting again for payments, and then and also looking at the payables balances, so analyzing payable balances, and also the if there's any disputes with payments. And then as part of that process, we then look at what are the close operations. What do we need to do to start to close our payables at the end of the period? So those are the kind of things that you start to look at in terms of processes. So your discovery workshop is not just collecting data, you're taking them through some of the standard processes as well. And then the same thing for receivables. For receivables, you're going to be looking at creating and managing transactions, how the invoices will be sent to the customer, whether by email, whether by B2B, XML, electronic. There's so many ways in which you can send invoices now. And then look at the billing issues. Are they going to be using collections, for example? How do they address billing issues, customer disputes, and so on? And then also processing the payments, how to match the remittances to the invoices, and also looking at managing the adjustments. Adjustments could be credit memos and so on. And then there are other receivable activities, posting the journals to, receivable journals to GL, and also the receivables close. So the core receivables process, you'll take the business through that as well. And then with cash management, again, just looking at the core processes from a very, very high level. So you have the activities, which includes the aggregation of your disbursements, your payroll, your collections. So you review all the cash management activities, validation by the bank, the interfaces. Is it going to be daily? Is it going to be periodic, monthly, weekly? Is it going to be, are you going to have intraday balances? Are you going to have many bank account statements per day? How many bank accounts do they have? And so on. And other activities like interbank activities. Do they transfer balances? Is it in real time? And so on and so forth. So those are the kind of things that you start to ask concerning cash management. And also your end of period positions, which could include month-end reconciliation, daily reconciliation, forecasting, plans, and so on. So all these could be part of the things that you'll be looking at. And with the core finance, you are looking at capturing transactions, your daily transactions, managing transaction taxes. How is that going to be managed? And then the closing of the accounting period, and also financial reporting and analysis. So discovery is not just collecting data, but it's also going through the high level core processes, not the detailed processes that would happen later, but it's just to capture the end-to-end flow of the high level processes. And this will also be in your scope document. The next thing to confirm are the roles of the users. And I would usually say that start to get a feel for the standard roles that you have in the application, and start to mention this to the business that, okay, the business, there are certain roles that are already built. Well, when I say built, they're out of the box. And this will satisfy the requirements for most businesses, but most businesses will create their own versions and then start to look at the details of what's inside each of those roles. So towards the end of this week, we'll go through the roles matrix, and then we'll look at how to kind of break that down into other areas as well. So with finance, you have your financial analyst and as a role, and you have your, the financial analyst is mainly looking at the performance of an enterprise. The general accountant will be recording and reporting financial transactions. The accounting manager will mainly do the work of the enterprise. We're looking at it more from an enterprise perspective, consolidations and this kind of stuff. And then you have financial controller, which serves mainly as a chief accountant. And again, the financial controller may be looking at the activities from the subledgers, payables, receivables, payroll, expenses, and so on. And then you have your CFO, which may be probably just looking at reporting. So each of these finance roles, you need to identify them at a very high level. If they have any other roles that are different to this, you start to capture this at the discovery phase as well. So for payables, against payables, you have your standard roles, specialist, you have your payables supervisor, your payables manager, procurement requester, your accounts receivable, supply accounts receivable specialist. So again, all these are standard roles. Now, basically what you're trying to do at this point is to try as much as possible and look at how the roles within each of these modules or functional activities are broken down within the organization. They may have different names that they call these roles, because every organization is different. But the first thing you're trying to do is try to map the activities that each person does within the organization within each of these standard Oracle roles. And if you need to make changes to them, you start to identify the changes that you need to make from a roles perspective. And this will also help you when you're planning and for how long it will take to put in the security matrix and so on. And then you have your receivables and cash management. You have core roles that are available within the application. Now, when you get to define the scope, you need to at that same point state clearly what is out of scope. So for our own implementation, intercompany accounting is out of scope. I can give you some documentation on how to do that, but in terms of the details, we're not covering that during the course, and it's because of the time that it takes. But I can give you some notes if you want to learn that. Then you can go in and try those on your own. Imaging, invoice imaging, again, Sales Cloud. We're not looking at integration with the billing system. We're not going to be testing the payment files with the bank. We're going to generate those files, but we're not going to test the outbound to any particular bank. We're not covering fixed assets. We're not covering expenses, even though you've gone through expenses during the starter course, but that's just for you to get a feel of the application in terms of the flow, in terms of how things move from one module to the other, in terms of how accounting is generated, in terms of how data is shared across the modules. And then procurement, we're not covering procurement as well. So those are the core areas that are out of scope. Always good to define what is in scope, what is out of scope. Now, before I go into the questionnaire, I'm going to show you an example of a solution document. And then we go into the questionnaire. We just go through some of the questionnaires, and then we'll then go in and look at the details of the scenarios that you're going to be covering during the course. So let me go into the area. Right. So this is this is your Agile Consultant Bootcamp course. So we are on day 3. This is the core video that you would need to watch for the details of what I've just gone through. And then the assignment, you have a number of documents that is attached. Now, the solution overview is an example of a scope document, and is always good to have one per project. Now, when you go on a project, it's always a good idea to ask them that, do you have a solution overview? This is probably prepared by a solutions architect, or maybe part of the discovery team. So it could even be a task that will be assigned to you if you're starting at the start of the project. So, and this document will detail the solution scope. So what's in scope, what's out of scope. It's a very simple document. When I say simple, it's very, very high level. And it starts with an executive summary. And then it goes into the modules that are in scope. And it covers the main processes that are in scope, and also the main roles. It's just a solution overview. And what you also have is that what's in scope from an integration perspective, what's in scope from a data loading perspective. And it's always good to have volumes. As I mentioned earlier on, you can have the volumetrics of the number of suppliers, invoices, and so on. Now, what normally happens is that before the project is costed from a planning perspective, this will be done at a very, very high level. And this is what will be used to determine the resources that are required to run the project. And also in terms of the how detailed that things can get to. Now, most companies will have, or most consultancy firms will have an estimator to estimate that if you have X number of data that you want to load, then this is how much it will cost. and so on. And if you're going to be implementing this many modules, this is how much it will cost, looking at the number of users and so on. So there are tools that are used to determine that. Now, it's possible that this could be some of the activities that you could be involved with, but again, it's good for you to know that this should exist when you go on a project. If it doesn't exist, it means that the project is just starting and this needs to be put together. And then you can also put in things which are out of scope, so that it's very clear in your mind what's in scope, what is out of scope. And then you have maybe some appendix as the business processes, for payables. So again, you go into these are very high level of the processes that are covered. Payables, cash management, receivables, and also the roles. These are the standard roles that are in scope. And then you have the generic reports. So there are some reports, and you can also list the reports. Now, there are reasons for this, because if the business needs extra reports, then they also need to be costed. All this will cost time and resources to be able to do this. And these are the standard reports. In some cases, you would actually show them the standard reports, and it should be, if it's not adequate, then it just means that it needs to be tidied up a little bit and so on. And then also the config, the number of the enterprise, the legal entities, the business unit, number of ledgers, chart of accounts. So all this will be part of the document that you will put together as a solutions document. And also the workflow. So within the workflow, how many areas will they need workflow? So these are the standard workflows that are with the application. And as part of your discovery workshop, you will be taking them through some of the standard workflow and the functionality. I'm going to cover some of them just to give you an idea of what this will look like. So you've got this. Now, the next is for us to look at the questionnaire. Now, the questionnaire, as I mentioned, is really going through some of the standard questions that will enable you to configure the modules. And when you have this session with the business, you're confirming the purpose of the questionnaire. Why are we collecting the data? Because we need to do this to configure an initial config. And then the steps that they need to perform to fill in the questionnaire. I will show you an example, and also what needs to happen if you for reviewing the questionnaire, and also any additional information. Now, this would usually be done by the business analyst, by the BA. And when I say the BA, I'm talking about the collecting of the questionnaires together, the questionnaires that I'm going to show you. And when you look at the questionnaire as a BA, you're asking the questions based upon what is going to be set up in the environment. Now, so we're going to be using this for the bootcamp. We've got data collection elements that we'll be looking at, and this is usually in the first phase of implementing. We'll also be looking at, in some cases, a solution demo. Now, what I've done in the past is I've actually used a vision environment, which is the same environment that you're using for this training, to demo some of this functionality and then show them the core elements of the processes. At this point, I'm not going to, I wouldn't take them into the details, but I'll just take them through the core elements of the processes so that they know, just as they know it from a user's perspective, just as you went through expenses all the way through to payments, as an example. So they understand exactly what it is. And then as you're going through that, you're collecting information using the questionnaire. And then this is mainly for clarification and also to confirm the scope. So in terms of the steps, to fill in the questionnaire. So I'm just going to go straight into an example of the questionnaire. And let's do it from there. So I've got some in the assignments. You're going to be looking at some of these config questions. One for financial management, payables, cash management, and receivables. So if I select financial management, it will download an Excel spreadsheet. And in the Excel spreadsheet, you'll have, oops, let me show you the spreadsheet. This is the spreadsheet here. So let's go to the so it's got a cover page. You've got instructions. So these are just generic instruction where you've got the purpose, how to fill out the questionnaire. And this questionnaire will be completed by the business. Yeah, you can guide them, but they actually own the responsibility to fill out the questionnaire. And so in terms of the questions, you're asking them basic questions that will enable you to configure your first load. Yeah, your first MVP. So you're asking questions like your organization structure, describe your chart of accounts. Now, there is a tab here that says chart of accounts ledger. So again, they will tell you the structure of their chart of accounts. Again, I'm going to show you some of the other elements that will enable them to be able to do this. So the questionnaire, we have questions. In some cases, they will have additional information tabs where they can go in and fill in some more information, like the natural accounts. Based upon their business, they'll be able to fill this in. As an example, I've got an example here. So that's the questionnaire. So for each of the modules, I've got some questions that you can use. So for example, do you use batches to enter journals? What information is necessary to register journals at the header level? You import journals from spreadsheets. How frequently are journal entries posted to your ledger? And so on and so forth. So, and each of these have different areas like your journal processing, multi-currency journal, secondary accounting, budgeting, reporting, and so on. So each of the modules have all of this. So you take them through the steps to fill in the questionnaire. The focus is on the to-be. As this is what they do right now, the to-be is where they're going, and you're kind of leading them on to where they need to get to. And then you have the core modules, which I've mentioned, and also you need to review and validate. The other additional information that you need to collect when going through your discovery workshop is any internal management report templates. So like the balance sheet, profit and loss account, cash flow. So start to get any of those type of reporting. It may be external reporting as well. Maybe they've got some legal returns like VAT returns, any statutory statements and so on. Any external templates, customer invoices, done-in letters, remittance advice and so on. And any communications template, do they need to send notifications and alerts to people in the organization to do certain things? So start to get that information during the discovery workshop. And also any internal control requirements like the approvals. They may say that yes, every cost center manager needs to be able to review certain transactions, or maybe if they're making a purchase of a certain type, then it needs to go to maybe the budget owner. So those are the kind of questions you need to ask at this point as well. And any other information that you believe is relevant. Now, there is a terminology used within implementing, which is Moscow. Moscow is, whilst you're going through these requirements, you're asking the question, is this a must-have? Because the business will try to add additional things, and some of them are just nice to have. They're not really a must-have. Challenge every requirement if you feel that it's not something that that is required. Now, if it's non-regulatory, if it's not that, and if it's not something that is required for them to be able to get to a point to deliver their accounts, close their month end, report properly, then it may just be a nice to have. So you can group them into must have, should have, could have, and won't have. And that's where the Moscow prioritization comes in. So prioritize the requirements and ensure that you're only going to be using information that is required to build the initial in your initial what's it called, your initial MVP. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to take you through some project scenarios. The details of this will be in the detailed video, but I'm just going to take you through for the next 10 minutes or so. And for each of the different areas, so financial management. So the project scenario is basically looking at what we are going to be implementing. We're going to go into this in a bit more details from next week when we start to build and when we start to test. But it's a bit like, this is our requirements document for us to deliver something after we've gone through the questionnaire. So from a company perspective, the company profile, we know that it's 3 countries. We know that they have about 100 employees. We know that they have about 25 application users. English is the core language, and they're going to be using standard processes. And out of that, the configurations that we need to validate will be our chart of account structure, the calendar, currency, the accounting method, the ledger, and also the enterprise structure. This is from financial management perspective. Every module will have its own different configuration that needs to be validated. From a chart of account structure, so we've got 7 segments. Acme chart of accounts. When you start to build yours, you would give yours a name, and you're actually going to be building your own chart of account structure and your own as well. So some of the key things that they're asking in the requirements is that it allows multi-dimensional reporting. That's standard out of the box, and the term used for that is vanilla. And it's going to be enabled for allocation, cost centers, and so on. So in terms of the structure of the chart of accounts, this is what it looks like. So we want a structure that is flexible, and this is what our value sets is going to look like. In terms of the numbers that you have here are the number, the length of the segments. This is the BSV. This is the cost center. So these are the segment labels for each of the different segments. So we have the company, the account, cost center, product, line of business, intercompany, and we have a structure that looks similar to this. And then in terms of the hierarchy structure will possibly look something like this. Again, we'll be using best practice. I'll give you some examples on this when we get to building this next week. And then we have the company structure. Again, each of the legal entities will be values within the structure of the company. And then we have our intercompany segment, product segment, and also the line of business and spare segment. Calendar, we're saying that we have one single accounting calendar for each country. So if there is a calendar, well, if any of the 3 C's or 4 C's, which is the chart of accounts, company, currency, accounting method, If it changes, then you need to have a separate ledger. So that's the rule for the ledger creation. So these are the examples of the current calendar. Currency, we have one base currency per ledger. And then the accounting method, we're using the accruals method. Ledger will have a single financial ledger for each country. And we are going to be using the standard cube. Again, we'll be looking at that in a bit more detail when we look at reporting. But that just gives you the multi-dimensional cube, which is enabled for reporting. These dimensions are all out of the box. You don't need to build them. They already exist. So you've got that. So for the enterprise structure, we have the standard structure that we mentioned. And for our next module to look at is payables. So for payables, key configuration areas are the basis of financial reporting, the invoice processing and payment processing. And for invoice processing, we are looking at the centralized invoice processing. We're looking at validation, which would be three-way match. Unmatched invoices we put on hold. Accounting options, supplier structure, shared locations. Again, all these are things that you need to start to think about when you're having these workshops. And then this is the approvals, invoice processing, who is going to approve non-PO invoices, for example. Again, we probably be the manager. So here, what you're doing here is that you're basically looking at the, once you go through the discovery workshop, you'll be going through each of these different areas, and then you'll be explaining, for example, this is how the approvals work. And this is standard out of the box. So we're just saying we'll be using out of the box. We're not making any changes to the approval process. Again, I'll show you when we get to approvals how to configure this. So all of these are configuration, but these are just examples. They may tell you that, oh, hang on, we don't want our AP manager to approve, but we want somebody else to do that. It could be that the specialist supervisor will approve for the specialist and so on. All that can be configured. So this is the point that you would start to capture those requirements. Payment processing, you need to identify the type of payments at this point. Is it centralized? Are they going to be using a specific type of payment, whether it's electronic, whether they've got international payments, whether it's checks. So all these are things that will be clarified during these sessions. And in most cases, you'll be recommending best practice. So also you confirm the bank structure, payment accounting, and so on. Same for your cash management. Let me run through this very quickly. Configure, very similar. Again, bank reconciliation is the core of your cash management. And you're basically trying to agree what's the file format. Are they going to be using automated reconciliation? How many banks do they have, and so on. And when you get to your receivables, again, very similar type of config requirements. Looking at your reporting, invoice processing, is this going to be electronic? Is it going to be emailed directly to the customer? How do you receive your payments? Are they paying directly to the bank? Are you going to be using some third party to collect payments? And also, how do you reconcile your debt monitoring and so on, collections? And then you have your receipt processing. You can take them through the glossary of terms as well. So I've got the glossary of terms. Well, the glossary, so take them through some of the core definitions. Again, I've got this in all the detailed videos, and you should be able to go through that. So that's basically what we are looking at for day 3. And you are looking at the scope definition. Key thing is the scope and the questionnaire, and also the discovery workshop. And remember that the business will complete the questionnaire, and they will send it back to you, and then you use that to build your first MVP. You may have multiple discovery workshops, may have smaller workshops with the other teams. So you could have a workshop with finance, you could have a workshop with payables, another workshop with receivables and cash management. So it could kind of break them out to different areas to collect the information that you need. So before we go into the actually we've gone into that anyway, what you need to do for today. Are there any questions from what you need to do for today's session, or questions from yesterday? No questions. Oh, okay, Bella.
I have questions
Okay, go on.
from yesterday. So when you're trying to create the invoice, if accounts receivables, like when we go to billing and we're creating the transaction, I was just wondering, in a real life scenario, the user, how they get to know the order details, right? The order that was fulfilled, the items that are there, like, and is there like an automated or integration like that the system can just pull, just like we have in for payables when
Yeah.
create invoice, there is a you match with the PO.
Mhm.
I'm just wondering for receivables how that's done.
So for receivables, in terms of how will the person search for the orders?
Yes, and then I'll add them to the line.
Oh, right. Okay. So when you're creating the invoice from
Invoice, yes,
yeah. Okay.
receivables.
Now, what happens with receivables is that if the order is coming in from another module, which is order management, it will automatically create those lines for you. So there's a program called the AutoInvoice import that will import all that data. Yeah.
Okay.
And the lines are created automatically. Yeah.
So the lines are created with the transaction of that we can see, right?
Yes, you'll be able to see that.
Just go there and complete the invoice creation then. Is that how it works?
What you mean in receivables?
Yes.
Yeah, in most cases, you wouldn't manually create your receivables transactions. You wouldn't, it would come in from an auto invoice external. So it could be that you sell your goods from the internet, and so when that transaction comes into receivables, it would add those lines. So you just run an import job that brings the transactions in.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's what would normally happen. Yeah. Okay.
And for today's class solution document, you show this overview. So are we going to be creating in real life? We'll create separate solution documents, right? For AP.
Yes. Yeah. So normally what happens is that there is usually a solutions document created by the solutions architect.
Okay.
Yeah, but then this is just for you to get familiar with this document now, and it may be a lot more detailed than this. In some cases, it's just an overview of what needs to be delivered. So it's just a scope. And it's always good to, I mean, in most implementations, this will be signed off as a deliverable. So somebody will sign off and say, this is what we're delivering. So that when you now start the project, if there are any issues, you can come back and say that this is what we have agreed to deliver. And this kind of forms the basis of what you're delivering. So that you don't have a scope creep, which usually happens when you start this kind of project. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
That's fine.
Oyemi, I've got a question. I know.
I think David, sorry. I think
Sorry.
you're jumping the queue. I can see that there was 2 hands up before you.
I'm acting like a Ghanaian, aren't I?
Okay, so let's do this in order. Okay, Kemi.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
I have redone the work. It's to do with when you're creating expense report. So, you know, there's a policy violation that was there when it comes to the dinner, people going for dinner, that you have to reallocate it to 2 people and share the amounts equally.
Yeah.
But if you've done it before, realizing that you have to share the expense equally, and you've already saved, how do you go back to adjust? Even though I've gone back to redo the whole thing completely, but I just wanted to know, how do you sort it out?
Okay, yeah, I think I saw your question. I think what needs to happen is that you need to go back and do an edit. I can have a look at that separately. Yeah, I think you probably.
Okay, yes, when you have the time, sir. I have gone to redo the whole thing, but I just wanted to sort of know how to edit it without going back and doing the whole thing.
Doing it again, yeah. So you can edit the transaction.
Yes,
you haven't submitted it. Well, you've got a violation and doesn't allow you to submit. You won't be able to submit, but you still search for it. You will see it, and you can always go back and edit that.
Yes,
so I'll have a look at that one. Yes.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, that's good. Thanks. Next one I think is Raymond.
Hi, Yemi. Good evening.
Hi.
Yes, hi. Yes, my question is not specific per se for the coursework for the previous session. My question is just a specific question in relation to the data gathering and the implementation process.
Yeah.
I just wanted to find out what would be the best ideal time frame to do the implementation. I mean, like, would it be wise to do the implementation in the middle of an accounting year or after a year-end close?
It's a very good question, because most companies would say that it's best to go live well, when it's not busy for them. Now, finance is a little bit notorious for things like year-end, month-ends, and so on. So I've always said that there's never a good time to go live. So, but you just need careful planning, to be honest. Yeah, and I know that there are project managers, even on this course, who have gone through the pain of going live at times which are not convenient for the business. But it's always good to have a consensus with the business and say that we're going live on this date, so everybody prepare your mind. So when we get to things like cutover, then you'll be able to see the activities that need to happen when you go through that process. Yeah.
Exactly. That's the reason, because I was looking at in terms of the cutover. Say if it's done after year end, you know what your closing positions are on the financial statement.
Yeah.
And then you look at the volume of data, because going back to the data, the volume of data you're going to pull forward to do the implementation will reduce significantly in terms of volume of data you're going to transfer to the system.
Yeah, it's a good question. It's a good question, and it's a real issue with businesses. But I just say that it requires careful planning, because different businesses will have different reasons why they don't want to go live at a particular point in time.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
That's fine. Yeah. Dominic.
Hi, Yemi. My question relates to, if we have an existing R12 customer, are there any delivered tools or templates to actually load an existing configuration?
Well, there are a number of third-party tools that claim to be able to do the uplift. I wouldn't call it an upgrade. Even Oracle has a tool called SOA. And my experience with a number of these tools is that you still need to do a lot of tweaking. You need to do a lot of, there's a lot of work that needs to be done to make it work as it should. Most of them will do will lift a lot of the data elements, because the tables are very similar for some of the modules. But the structure of the applications are very different. For example, the enterprise structure, the user structure, there's a lot of different elements. But I don't know of any tool that is 100% perfect, especially with R12, with customizations and so on. Yes. And Fusion doesn't have, doesn't really support the kind of customizations that you have in R12. So it's not a one-to-one lift and shift. You know what I mean? Yeah. Yes. Okay. I'm just talking out of experience. There's a lot of companies out there who say, "Oh yeah, we can do it," but it's it's when you start that you know that it's not as easy as they claim to be. Yeah.
Wishful thinking.
Yeah. Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah. So David, is your hand?
Oh yeah. Thanks. Yeah, Yemi, I know, like, we're having a look at the structure, the enterprise and the business units and the legal entities. I know in such a scenario, because I've never implemented one before, so I'm more like an end user. Yeah. I was kind of doing something on payables at the moment before I just joined the course on Oracle. Yeah. What's from your experience, what's a very good way of getting a handle on this structure, a very simple way of kind of having that framework of that legal entity, enterprise and stuff like that? Because I think when you go for an implementation, it's right in the heat of the moment. And then might be asking a lot of questions, but what's a very simple way? I know I've listened to the video, watched the video and stuff like that, but I'm just trying to gain from your experience, because it's starting to make sense a bit. But what's a very good way of...
I was going to say that's why you're on the course, because the experience that I've gained in implementing, for example, with enterprise structure, is just to say, just go for the structure of the existing business. So you're bringing the physical into the computer. Let's put it that way. Yeah. So the physical structure is what you would mirror. And for me, that's the key test. Okay. If it doesn't align, then there has to be a reason. And there are other ways in which you can represent certain representations of the business, like using business units, for example.
Okay.
Yeah. So the enterprise structure, you've got your core enterprise, the legal entity, you've got your core business units, and then you have all the other areas which are fringes around it. But it's really around the structure of how the business operates and also the physical structure of the business. I think I've got some documents from Oracle that I can share.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I have some on, because some structures are very complicated. So, so for large companies, it's never as easy as you may think it should be. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So, but ultimately, the idea is to get them to follow good practice. I mean, even the structure is a bit wonky. Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you very much. I've got two other questions here in the chat. One is, when you have business units set up, why have right? Okay, very good question. Samson has spotted something in my slides. Yes, I mean those are just examples. Yes. Now, some companies use line of business, which is slightly different from the business units. So some people use business units as a way of grouping operations. For example, procurements, centralized procurement and so on. But I've just put that there as an example of what you would see out there. I'm still going to discuss whether that's a good design or not when we get to the chart of accounts. But well spotted, yes. I put that in there deliberately, yeah. So even the product segment that was there, really, is it a good design? Again, we'll talk about that later. But that's just an example of where if you're implementing a module, you shouldn't put in data in that module in your chart of accounts. So for example, if you see a chart of accounts with customers as one of the segments, you know that is a very bad design, or suppliers as one of the segments. Even products, if they're not implementing, if they're implementing inventory, then they shouldn't have products as a segment and things like that. So yeah, thank you. Another question here, I don't have implementation experience, so how many days does the workshop happen? And how does one capture the data from different stakeholders if they're located in different offices and location? Who signs up the data captured? Right, another good question. Now, from experience, what happens, I mean, with things like Zoom and Teams and Google Meet, and it's now a lot easier. In the old days, you would have to travel to different locations and start to gather information, and it takes a long time. But now, with the advent of online-based meetings, things can happen within a week that would normally take months to happen. And you can gather everyone in a room on Teams or on Zoom, and then go through your workshop online. So that's one of the best ways to do that, and that can happen within a week, within 2 weeks. But I would say that just make sure you plan your sessions so that the main stakeholders who are going to sign off the data or your discovery workshop will be at those sessions, because people will give you reasons why they can't be there. You have to remember that you're attending a session, or you're coming in externally, and people are working, doing their normal day job. So what you're trying to do is to fit whatever you're doing inside their normal day-to-day activities. So that's the challenge that you have as an implementation consultant. Yeah. Okay. Another question. During the questionnaire, someone is saying, is cloud the same as Fusion? Yes. Yeah. Fusion Applications was the original name, but the EBS Cloud was now implemented on the cloud, but not cloud as in the real sense. It's still hosted on the cloud, but that's basically what it is. And then people now thought, oh, this is now confusing. How can we have two cloud products doing different things? And then Oracle bought NetSuite, which is also a cloud product. And there's a lot of confusions. And people went back and started to call ERP Cloud Fusion. So that's where Fusion comes, that's how Fusion came back in again. So if you see Fusion in the documentation, just know that it's the same product, which is ERP Cloud, yeah. During the questionnaire requirements exercise, how do we manage dominant parties who try to override others? I would say with wisdom, because you would also have people who want their core activities to be out there in front of everybody, and some people would not say anything. And it's at the last minute that you discover that they have some core processes that have not been shared. And that's why you need to engage as many people as and somebody has said, and a strong sponsor. Yeah, you need a very strong sponsor, somebody that would say, this is how, that would say, we are signing off, this is what we need to do, and we're going for it, you know, and so on. So, yeah. Is Oracle Cloud R13 the most version release? Yes, it's actually stopped at R13 for a long time, but then every year you have 4 releases. So this year you have 23 A, B, C, D. every quarter. So it's still R13, but it's different versions a year or different releases. I can see a hand is up. We've gone 5 minutes over. Bella.
Yeah, sorry, I just want to note, I posted question, or is it comments for day one?
Yeah.
I had an issue when trying to create accounting yesterday, so
Yeah.
then just look at it.
Yeah, I think I've responded to that.
Oh,
Yeah, just before this session. Yeah, have a look. I think you need to run create accounting for the actual payables invoices before you run the one for payments. Yeah. Okay.
okay. Oh, okay, all right, that's where
Yeah.
I missed. Okay.
Yeah, because
Okay.
it couldn't find the
I
original.
thought I did.
It couldn't find the original credit to the AP liability when you wanted to debit in the in the payments. So that's basically what's happened. Yeah.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
No problem. Right. So let's close for today, and then tomorrow, same time, same place, and let's just keep going. And yeah. So thank you, everybody, and see you tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you very much. See you tomorrow.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.